Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode on Laid Back the Tourism podcast. And our topic for this week is, does my lifestyle increase cancer risk? And our guest for this week is Dr. Ruth Morse, who is an associate professor at the University of the West of England, Bristol, here in the UK. Hello Ruth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Aaron. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah. So is this your first ever podcast?
It's my first ever podcast, so I'm a little bit nervous, but we'll see how it goes, all right?
You don't have to. It's a privilege of mine to have you on your first ever podcast, for you to be having your first ever podcast on my show. So that's fun.
Oh.
Do you have any expectations?
Nothing at all at the moment, but knowing that we've had some good conversations in the past, I expect I'm going to forget it's a podcast and we'll just have a really good chat. So
Definitely. But first of all, before we start, let me give just a little background story here about this wonderful lady. So she was my PhD supervisor when I did my PhD at University of West of England, Bristol. She really believed in me and taught me all I know about cancer. So I think it's only right to make sure I have this cancer talk and cancer chat with you. So first of all, congratulations on your promotion again, on becoming a professor.
Thank you so much.
Long overdue, isn't it?
Oh, totally long overdue, but I have learned a lot by the journey, so that's quite good. So yeah.
So when you talk about the journey, so how has the academic journey been for you then?
So it's intriguing really because when I first started in uni, it was kind of said that it would take me, say, about 5 years to get promotion. And it felt a little bit like the goalposts kept changing. And in a way, I kind of understand now why that was the case.
Yeah.
Basically because, well, life changes, doesn't it? Of course it does. And there were some times when I get frustrated in seeing other people getting promoted above me. And, it's basically like 20 odd years I'd been working and doing some great stuff and feeling like I wasn't recognized.
Yeah.
So it's made a massive difference to my confidence getting this promotion, because I think one of the worst things about academia is that when you're working with a load of other people who seem to be highly qualified, highly trained and all of that, it's very easy to get a bit despondent, to get a bit of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And so to get this recognition makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
But I think ironically enough, having now gone through the process, I think that the skill base was always there, but a lot of it is about the way that you present yourself and that you don't get too stuck in one area, so that you show that you're acting as a bit of a holistic academic. So, more than happy to share some of the key take-home messages that I got from that journey, because when I did a workshop about, say, 4 or 5 months before I put my application in, they said to me, it takes ages to put the application together. And if I'm totally honest with you, it actually took me about 2 days to put the application together.
Yeah.
But it didn't take long to put the application together because basically I'd already done the work.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like, as long as you've got your strategy about knowing what the goals are and knowing what you have to achieve, then actually putting it down on paper wasn't so difficult, as long as you've got your strategy right.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of key learning points that I think are probably applicable to most promotions, which has now kind of dangled the carrot of, right, okay, I thought I was only going to be happy with associate professor, but they're now dangling the carrot of professor, and so I feel like I got more knowledge of what it takes to get to that place. If that makes sense. So it's been a bit of a despairing journey, because I think we all get a lot of imposter syndrome, and to get this recognition makes a massive difference on your confidence, because you feel recognized,
But like I've always told you, it's not because we're on the podcast. I say this, you are one of the smartest men I've ever met, but you keep on talking about now that you've gone through the process, you now have pointers. So what would you say if you go back now to when you started your career? What strategic plan would you have taken?
Right, so it's kind of intriguing, right? Because if I look at my colleagues and I look at what I did, a lot of what I did was guided by my line managers, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of made sense in the beginning because where I was predominantly employed for my research, a lot of the roles that I took on as an academic were very much orientated around that.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I did things like I got involved in the committee for the Human Tissue Act.
Yeah.
I got involved in chairing the ethical committee.
Yeah.
All of the select research groups I got involved in.
Yeah.
And of course, as you know, I led the professional doctorate for biomedical sciences. So it was all very joined up, it was very linked up.
Yeah.
That's good because it shows a trajectory for you.
Yeah.
But in the context of going on to get promotion, one of the dangers is if you imagine that you've got a list of criteria for promotion, right?
Yeah.
And they want you, they want to see you as being an all-round academic.
Yeah.
Okay. Then if you have everything that is too closely linked, then there's a danger that there are certain boxes against the criteria that get ticked several times.
Yeah.
And then there are other boxes that don't get ticked at all.
Yeah.
And so it can be frustrating as an academic because what you're kind of looking at is you'll see your colleagues and you'll be saying, oh my God, they are superb, outstanding, brilliant. Of course they deserve a promotion. And one of the take-home messages that I understood is that when it goes through the promotion round, they've got this list of boxes that they want ticked. And they were like, have they ticked that one? Yeah, they've ticked it billions of times. Have they ticked this one? No. Have they ticked that one? No.
Yeah.
So if you get over-focused in one area, you can look outstanding in all ways in that area. And then if you're not taking the other boxes...
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
So, of course, that was one of the big eye-openers for me, in that, there were people who I was thinking, like, well, why are they getting promoted and I'm not? And similarly, when I did get promoted and there was others who I thought were far superior to me, it then came out that I was more balanced across all of the boxes and I was ticking every box.
Yeah.
Whereas some of these people I was seeing who I was thinking, oh my God, they're superb. They were superb in their area, but then they weren't addressing the other criteria for the role.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But in your position now, you are also the Applied School of Science lead for Athens 1.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
So Athena Swan started back, I think it was about 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
And it started out, first of all, because, we're all very mindful about equality.
Yeah.
And of course, for a long time, there wasn't really much equality for women in the STEM subjects.
Yeah.
And so Athena Swan started out because it's about scientist women in STEM subjects and about creating that equality for them. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's very much about, let's be honest, we can look at all sorts of sort of like statistics about academia because we can see that there's a gross underrepresentation of Black individuals in STEM subject as well, and then getting promoted to professorship.
Yeah.
But in the same way, we were seeing the same things with women, in that if you look at undergraduate courses, we seem to have, maybe 60% enrollment of women on STEM subjects. Yeah. But by the time you get up to the top, up to the vice chancellor areas, it's predominantly male. Yeah. Predominantly male in those places. And of course, the other thing is that when they were looking at salary payments, women simply weren't getting the same salaries that men were. Yeah. And so the Athena Swan was very much about gender equality. Yeah. But it started out as equality for women. Yeah. But now we're moving into an environment where it's more about gender equality, because there's no doubt that, people have prejudices. Of course they do. But there's prejudices initially against women. We've now got a bunch of, let me phrase this nicely, working class white males. Yeah. Who are disillusioned because they're suddenly coming into an environment where they don't know the history of where the white male was the predominant factor. Okay. And while they feel like everything is against them. Yeah. And so they are getting disillusioned as well. And so what we need to work towards is that equality. And of course, we've got to do equality for LGBT as well, because we know that sort of like discriminatory acts of violence have increased against people like that as well. And so it's about making sure that if people are in higher education, either as a student or as an academic or as just a general member of staff, that they should feel that they are free and able and equal to do their job to the best of their ability without having to face these sort of prejudices.
Yeah.
So as my lead in Athena Swan, at the moment it's just for the school, and it's identifying things that are very much at a school level, so degree level and student and staff level, where I make sure that everybody feels that they're in a good place with respect to their gender, and that nothing is being a prejudice which is sitting in the way of them doing their job. So we cover academics, students, professional services, support staff, technical staff, anybody who is in our school is supported by this charter. And it's important actually, because there's various funding. I mean, I suppose it's a bit of an incentive in a way. It shouldn't be an incentive because we should have equality anyway. But the incentive is that if you want to have funding for various purposes in higher education, you've got to sign up to this charter. And if you're not showing you're doing a good job, you're not eligible for it.
Yeah.
So it's forcing people to act in an equal manner and to be fair and, across the board line.
Yeah. Fair.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I agree, because it's important for us to ensure that there's inclusivity and equality. Everybody feels their opinion and their contribution to science is actually welcome, to be honest. But
absolutely.
Yeah, but now let's get down to our main topic for the day. We've talked about cancer and lifestyle and how it links to cancer. But first of all, in a lay person summary, what is cancer actually?
So, yeah, cancer is a tricky one to describe because we think of it as one disease, and it's really not one disease, because basically pretty much every organ in the body can become cancerous. And there can be more than one type of cancer within each organ. So I'm really not sure where the last count came to with respect to the number of tumours that are recognised, but we're literally talking about, in the hundreds of different types of tumours that we can recognise. So it's difficult to be prescriptive, but in a simplistic term, cancer is when a normal cell loses control of its capacity to replicate itself, to control its function, and to stay within the boundaries of where it's supposed to live and function, such that it encroaches on normal bodily function, and kind of takes over that organ and affects your normal function. So a tumorigenic cell, a true definition of it is something that has lost its control on replication, and has the capacity to invade into other organs, and affect the overall function. Okay.
Yeah, but how common is cancer in the world? Like, because I read somewhere that cancer is the leading cause of death in the world now. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure that I would totally agree with that, but of course, I think that epidemiology is going to be very interesting over the next couple of decades, because science has advanced so much recently that I think it changes around that stuff quite a lot. I mean, it always used to be that the biggest killer was infectious disease.
Yeah.
Of course, once we got antibiotics, that pretty much knocked infectious disease on the head. But of course, when it was overprescribed, now we're going back into an environment where we've got drug resistance, and so bacteria are circumventing drugs. So that is still a major problem for us. But cancer is certainly one of the big killers. It's certainly one of the big killers. But it's up there with things like cardiovascular disease as well. And that's kind of interesting, really, because if you think about cardiovascular disease, there is a strong influence of lifestyle on that as well. And in my mind, we're in a very stressful environment at the moment, and there's good evidence that stress can have a massive impact on our health. I mean, I know that I could be, perhaps the wrong person to say this, because I know I get very busy with my job and I probably don't exercise as much as I should, but there's no doubt about it that building personal time and relaxation into your life will go an awfully long way to helping you make the right lifestyle choices and to look after your general health, which is so important, because it certainly plays an impact not only on your mental health but your cardiovascular condition and certainly your tumors. There's no two ways about it, really. But it's certainly one of the big killers. I mean, we've gone from a position where we did say 1 in 3 people would get a tumor. It's closer to 1 in 2 now. And of course, when we look at that statistics, we need to take care about the way that we look at it, because we say, 1 in 2 people is going to get a tumor. Well, 1 in 2 people isn't going to get a tumor. And whilst the incidences are definitely going up, that's kind of reflective that we are much, much more aware. We look out for symptoms. We got better screening. We look out for the symptoms people have. So incidence rate is definitely going up because we're better at diagnosing it. But for some tumours, the actual death rate has gone down because we've also got better at treating it.
Yeah.
But of course, in an aging environment, when infectious disease isn't getting you first, then tumorigenesis just looks more common because other things aren't killing you first.
Yeah.
Definitely a massive issue. And I tell you what is interesting is that it's been estimated that a significant number of tumours actually are preventable.
Yeah.
And I think the last suggestion was somewhere in the region of about, say, 30 to 40% of tumours are considered to be preventable if we make the right lifestyle choices.
Yeah. So, because that will lead me to my next question for you now. If 30 to 40% of these tumors are preventable, because I read somewhere that cancer is a preventable disease, but for this tumor type of tumors to be preventable, we have to make major life changes. So, how do you think our lifestyle choices can increase our risk to cancer?
So, I think that there's definitely some underpinning genetics which will influence whether you will or won't. But the most obvious things to think about is things like smoking.
Yeah.
Right? If you smoke cigarettes, there are literally hundreds of chemicals within tobacco that are what we call genotoxic. It means that it will damage your DNA, and damage to the DNA can then lead to mutation, which then can obviously lead to tumors.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, just that decision to smoke and to expose your lungs to all of these carcinogenic genotoxic agents is enough to cause lung cancer. And obviously the more that you smoke, the more of the risk. Let me give you an analogy.
Yeah.
If I am somebody who lives close to my work and I can walk it in 5 minutes, and so I very infrequently get into my car, perhaps the only driving that I do is, say, at the weekends, then the chances of me having a road traffic accident is quite low.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm simply not getting into my car.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, I happen to be someone who lives, say, an hour from work, and there's no good bus or train routes or whatever, and I get into my car every day, so I'm actually driving, say, an hour there and an hour back, then the chances of me colliding with another car is far, far, far greater.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the more that you do something, the more that you're exposed to it, the bigger the risk is that, an anomalous event is going to happen.
True.
Okay?
True. Yeah.
So if you don't smoke, it's not saying that you will never get lung cancer, because it depends on other things that you're exposed to. So it could be things from your occupation. So I don't know whether you're probably too young to remember this guy, but there was a guy called, something Castle. He used to do the Guinness Book of Records when I was a little girl. And he died of lung cancer because he was a phenomenal trumpet player.
Okay.
And he used to work in bars. And he would be playing jazz in these bars, and of course when I was a younger person it was okay to smoke in bars.
Yeah.
So he ended up getting lung cancer as a result of his occupation because he was inhaling everybody else's secondhand smoke.
Yeah.
Right. But there's no doubt that if you then look at the other end of the spectrum, the people who are serial long-term smokers and they're constantly smoking and, smoking, say, 30, 40 cigarettes a day, then there's direct exposure to their lungs of these chemicals. And so whilst it took him pretty much his lifetime to get and die of lung cancer, these other people are dying much, much younger because of the irritation to their lungs. I mean, if you look at people in between, you get people like the builders, right? My grandfather was in the era where it was deemed acceptable to put asbestos into buildings.
Yeah.
But he was also retiring around the time where they started taking it out when they realized the risk. And so my grandfather died of lung cancer, and he wasn't a smoker, but he died because of his occupation, because of what he was exposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, another interesting historic fact is that if you look at things like oral tumours, so tumours of the mouth, you never see those in anybody who doesn't smoke or chew tobacco.
Yeah.
All right. And there are some viral infections that you can get these days, which are a little bit more common, which can actually cause oral tumours. But prior to that, the only other people who used to get oral tumours used to be the clock makers, the watchmakers, because before the day we had digital watches and Fitbits and stuff, they used to paint the clock face with fluorescent colours. So in the night, you could actually see the time. They would paint the numbers on the face, and they would also paint the hands of the watch. And because it was very fine work, they tended to lick their paintbrush to bring it to a tight point. Of course, they didn't realise that the fluorescent chemicals that they were painting on the clock face were actually radioactive.
Yeah.
So they used to get a high incidence of oral tumours purely because of the job. So, of course, in that setting, it's two things. It's either if in your lifestyle or in your occupation you are overexposed to things that can damage your DNA, then you've got a far greater risk of having an adverse event which could cause you complications later on in your life.
Yeah, interesting. So
yeah,
you mentioned some occupations that have high disposition to cancer. Are there others?
Oh, absolutely. I tell you one of the classic ones, which is a difference between occupation and lifestyle.
Yeah.
Okay. If I said to you, who do you think is the most likely to get a skin tumour? What would you guess? Men or women?
Women.
Why?
Because of the skin products women use, and they tend to go to the beach and sunbathe more than men.
Absolutely. And that's what we think of, right? We think that women are far more likely to have skin tumours than men. Okay, but, when was the last time, not so much these days to be fair, but when was the last time you saw a guy walking down the pavement with his shirt off?
Rarely. But these days, you see people doing it during the summer, to be fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Now, you think of a fair-skinned person in the UK with their shirt off, strutting down the road. They'd look like a bit of an idiot if they were all oiled up with their sunscreen, right?
Yeah.
The guys walk down the street with their shirts off and they don't put sunscreen on.
Yeah.
Whereas if a woman's lying on the beach and she's deliberately sunbathing, she's far more likely to put sunscreen on.
Yeah.
Because she knows that she's actively getting exposed to the sun.
Yeah.
Right? The other thing is that historically, and this is where I say that epidemiology is interesting, okay, because, in decades gone by, the people who were in the workplace was actually the guys. Yeah. So, in general, if you look at cancer incidence, it's much higher in men than it is in women, although in fairness, men seem to be responding to warnings better than women are, okay? And it's men historically who had the outside jobs. They were the ones that were the gardeners and the labourers and the builders and the brickies. And so, of course, for a long time, we used to have them on the building sites before we've got more, risk assessments in place. And they'd be there on the building sites, basically walking around with their shirts off and just walking around in their trousers.
Yeah.
Because they were actually, getting a bit of a suntan. And so in actual fact, skin tumours are far more prevalent in men because women won't walk down a pavement with their shirt off. I mean, they'd cause a car crash, wouldn't they? All right. But women just don't do that. What they tend to do is they might lie in their garden or they might lie on the beach. And in that activity of actively engaging with the idea of sunbathing, they'll put a sunscreen on. At least most of them will. Not everybody will, but most of them will put a sunscreen on.
Yeah.
But guys tend not to. They're in their work and they don't think that they're actively sunbathing. And so in actual fact, incidence for melanoma is far higher in men than it is in women.
So that means people who are maybe carpenters, plumbers, if they walk without their shirt on, it's likely that they will develop cancer then.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Because do you know what? The funny thing is the other day, I used to pay out for this pretty expensive sun cream. And I was trying to save some cash. So I bought something that was a little bit cheaper. And it was a very valuable lesson for me because the expensive stuff has got sunscreen in it, whereas the cheap stuff didn't.
Yeah.
And I literally sat out, you know me, I'm quite fair-skinned anyway, but I literally sat out talking to someone for about 10, 15 minutes and wearing this cheaper sunscreen. Suddenly, all of my face got really burnt. And it made me realise how the more expensive stuff was so much better because it actually had a sunscreen in it.
Okay.
So yeah, and you know what, right? There's loads of different occupations, and of course it depends on the nature of the occupation that you're in.
Yeah.
So for instance, you've got to be really careful in some clinical places where they're administering chemotherapy or radiotherapy.
Yeah.
If you work in labs, it's one of the main reasons that we got risk assessments so that we can confine the stuff that we're working with.
Yeah.
People in welding and metalworks, anything that has got combustion associated with it.
Yeah.
It's a risk,
Yeah. Interesting.
And in some respects it is very interesting because I think that much as you don't want to lose people through tumours, we've learned a lot about what is a risk based on the sort of tumours people have because of their lifestyle and occupation. has been. So if we know what they're working with and you can see that there is a trend towards a certain type of tumour, it actually helps us understand what the causes are. And if we then understand what the causes are, then we can do something about treating them.
Well, to understand what the causes are, for example, I know obesity is one of the risk factors as well. So, is there any type of food that you think increases cancer risk? Can it be linked to exercise and physical activity as well? Like any type of food you think can increase or decrease cancer risk?
Well, this is a really interesting one, and it is quite a complicated answer, really. I mean, in some respects, the lack of activity can go quite a long way towards your health anyway. Okay, so one of the things that we talk about is oxidative stress. And so if you don't exercise well, if you don't have, a certain element of relaxation in your life, then you can build up this oxidative damage. It's why antioxidants have, really being pushed out on the market. Oh, take these antioxidants, they'll sort you out. I mean, in practice, a lot of them will go into your body and pretty much come out the other end. And, I'm not saying that you won't absorb some of it, but you can absorb an awful lot more if you eat good numbers of fruits and veggies, right? But you don't want to overkill anything because like there's quite a lot of sugar in fruit. So, I know that I eat an excessive amount of fruit and I have to cut back on it a little bit because there's far too much sugar in my diet.
Yeah.
But, certainly some of the fats aren't very good for you. They're probably worse for things like cardiovascular disease. But there are certain things like red meats are more tightly associated with tumorigenesis. And if you tend to overcook them, so if you burn them a bit, because that goes hand in hand with that combustion I was saying about that burning of stuff, that's not great. So things like white meats and fish are much better for you. Some of the more healthy oils from fish are better for you. But yeah, I mean, if you eat a good amount of fruit and veg, it seems to protect you much better, but that's counterbalanced with doing some good exercise and keeping an eye on your weight, really.
But if you eat fruit and vegetables, that's gonna help you at least to actually maintain at least to lose weight and maintain a lean weight, at least.
Exactly.
At least if you don't exercise a lot, at least it's gonna help you to interesting.
I tell you something else that's quite interesting while we're on that point, actually, is how about we talk about alcohol for a moment? All right. Okay, because you and me, we've had a drink together and we've had a nice time. All right. Okay, but alcohol is an interesting one because if you look at, say, the French, alcohol is an intrinsic part of their diet, but they're very, very controlled in what they have. And the number of times I've been to France, they sort of like they'll have a glass of wine with their meal and they stop there. Whereas we know the UK society is perhaps not as good at stopping at one glass, right? Now, alcohol is interesting because alcohol is not DNA damaging, right? It's not. But what it can do is it can potentiate your risk in certain environments. So there's some very nice analysis that shows if you smoke, you are far more likely to drink as well, right?
True.
But for those people who only smoke, and there is a small proportion of people who only smoke.
That's very rare,
It's very rare. It's very rare. Those who only smoke often are recovering alcoholics, so they're a little bit tricky to look at. But you have got some small groups of people who smoke but don't drink. But you also have tobacco chewers, right? So they're kind of a good comparison, although you're not actually burning the tobacco. And what you see is that if you are an alcoholic, so if you only drink, alcohol on its own doesn't cause tumours, although if you're an alcoholic, it can lead to it through liver damage, right? If you smoke and drink, it tends to cause quite serious risk for tumours. But if you only smoke, it's not as bad as if you smoke and drink. So for people who are tobacco chewers, or for that small group of people who only smoke, yes, they've got an increased risk over those who do neither. But if you add alcohol to smoking or tobacco chewing, it makes it much, much worse than if you only smoke. And so alcohol is something that we call a potentiator. It just makes the risk a bit worse. So alcohol on its own, and this is where, in some respects, part of the argument is to actually create a balance in your life, to have some kind of balance. Because on the one hand, if you look at the French, having alcohol actually can be quite a nice relaxant. It can be something that will take that stress away from you, as long as you do it within reasonable measures. Because if you take it with things like smoking, it can actually make things worse. So that's kind of an interesting one, because you do have elements like that can just make things a little bit worse.
But now I know you mentioned alcohol and how the French, the difference in how the French and the British look at drinking alcohol. But now thinking at a larger scale, like if you look at socioeconomic status of people, right? Maybe like level of education, family background, social network, and where do you think their lifestyle, like, do you think these factors, socioeconomic status, education, family, do you think they influence their lifestyle choices, which can actually increase their cancer risk as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can't ignore socio-demographics at all.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I think it influences their diet.
Yeah.
I think it influences the sort of activities that they would do.
Yeah.
Gyms don't come cheaply. At the end of the day, you don't have to go to a gym to get some exercise. You can go out for a walk, you can go out for a run, go out for a bike ride, but bikes aren't cheap either.
Yeah.
So if you don't have much spare cash, then unless you can be motivated to have a walk around or a run around or something like that, then you've got to question if they're going to do the same levels of exercise. You're going to have to question the sort of job that they've got, and if they've got more manual jobs that have got longer hours, then maybe they haven't got the time to do the exercise.
Yeah.
But I think another massive contributor to this, and I can give you a bit of an example, is that the area in which you live.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that there are certain areas that are very expensive to live in for good reason, and there are other areas that are not quite so expensive to live in for good reason. So, for instance, I originally come from South Wales. I originally come from a place called the Gower, which is beautiful countryside, beautiful beaches. But to the east of the Gower, to the east of Swansea, was an area called Talbot, which is a hell of a lot cleaner now than it was when I was a young girl. And we used to have steelworks and combustion works and coal works and all sorts of stuff there. And, there used to be jokes about not being able to see whether it was the sun or the moon because of all of the pollution that was in the air.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that the cancer team for the West Glamorgan City Council had far more representatives in that area than over where I lived. I mean, I was just very lucky. I was living in a nice area. And so, the houses that were less expensive were in an area where the air pollution was just off the scale.
Yeah.
And so those people who had better money could afford to live in the places that weren't polluted. So we then have to look at the way in which we control the pollution. So, of course, then that comes back to climate change as well. So, it's quite a complex picture. So socioeconomics on so many levels about where you live, what you eat, how you exercise, can have an influence on it,
So with your explanation, so I'm guessing people are more exposed to the pollution because of their socioeconomic status. They have more chances of getting the cancer compared to people who live in the affluent places then.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's complicated because at the end of the day, it's partly about why is that area cheaper to live in?
True. That's a good question. Yeah,
exactly. And so there are certain areas that you just know that there is a very good reason for why it's cheaper to live there, and of course it was cheaper to live there because you were sitting right under all of these power plants.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that the prevailing winds in the Bristol Channel carry Avonmouth right across the top of North Bristol. And when I first got to Bristol, there was this joke about there being North Bristol syndrome. And I remember the first couple of years I was here, I used to have terrible coughs and colds and stuff while I was getting used to the environment. And so, of course, that part of Bristol was cheaper to live in than if you went closer down to the harbour side where it was much cleaner. So, but that isn't necessarily why the area is cheap. So I think that we have to be cautious in if you are in the vicinity of things like that, then there is certainly a higher risk. But then the other part would be about what your diet would be, what your exercise would be, what your job is.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Interesting. What about education, level of education? What do you think about that? Is there any link between the level of education you have and cancer?
To be honest, I'm not really aware that education plays a major role, but I would be inclined to believe that it probably does, because if you are highly educated and you have access to this information, then you probably make better choices. But again, better choices in inverted commas.
Yeah.
All right. I would imagine that the more highly educated you are and the more access you have to this information, it's a tricky one because, of course, like in recent years, education has been more open to more people. And so, I think that there is scope for more people to understand it, irrespective of where the socio-demographics are. And of course, certainly it's promoted on TV. I mean, one of the questions I have to ask is, the people who will not believe the progress that we have made in both our understanding and our treatment. We still got people who say, I don't believe that smoking causes lung cancer because I know somebody who smoked all their life and didn't get it. Well, here's the other flip side, you see, is that I know somebody who smoked all their life and didn't get it either. I mean, my great uncle, he used to roll his own without filters and everything, And in actual fact, when he did pass away, which was in his late 80s, they could see shadows on his lungs, but he lived an extremely healthy life. So, of course, this is partly about where genetics comes in as well, because for every person who, for whatever reason, has a risk, so if we think about those people, like when they talk about, they've got the breast cancer mutation, and so, they're more likely to get it younger, then conversely, we have to assume that there's people in the environment who have got really powerful genetics, really good underpinning biology that kind of protects them. And I'm kind of assuming that my uncle was one of those people. So just because we've got one person who doesn't get it, doesn't mean that it's not true. So I think the education one is a tricky one. I do think that there's an element of having the understanding and the knowledge and being willing to listen. Because I know that there are some people that, if smoking is their only vice and they enjoy it and they know somebody who hasn't had tumours from it, then, they've decided that that's what they want to do. But they have to then take the risks and the consequences that go with it,
Interesting.
Yeah. But education's a tricky one. I think there's better education for more, particularly with the media. I think that people are more aware of what the risks are. But education's a tricky one, I think. Mind you, I suppose education goes kind of hand in hand with socioeconomic status as well, although even that doesn't always tie together.
But because of time, so I'm going to ask you the final question. So think about this now. This is you thinking outside the box. So if I say I have this power, and let's say I'm the ruler of Great Britain and I give you this power, this responsibility to change or influence the lifestyle of people in Bristol to ensure everybody maintains a healthy lifestyle, how do you think you're going to go about it?
Oh gosh, that's a loaded question, isn't it? Yeah, it is a loaded question. Do you know what, actually? I don't know that this is possible, but what I would like to see in an ideal world would be, we've always historically done Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 and all of that, okay? And I know that's not true for every job, but we also know that there's not necessarily enough jobs to go around. So if we could only sort out our economy where everything wasn't so flipping expensive and so we needed to have the best salary we could have, wouldn't it be good if everybody did something like a 4-day week? So there was more jobs to spread around, it was a little bit more job share. Because then it would mean we'd get more relaxation time, we'd get more time to, take the stress away, we'd have more time to have exercise time, to take some time out to eat well. So, take some of the pressures of work off so that people would have more time to actually cook a good meal from scratch rather than do convenient stuff. And to actually have time to spend quality time with families to relax, and also quality time for themselves to get some exercise in, because I know that I'm really guilty at the moment with work pressures of simply not getting to the gym in the same way as I used to. So for me, if we could do something where we could, resurrect the economy a little bit so that people could afford to do that, I think that would be a major step forward.
Interesting. Well, hopefully we should be able to do that. But I think eventually in the long run, the world is going to go to fall, or at least give people the option, because now we have option of people actually sharing their jobs. I think I read that somewhere. I didn't know it existed until recently. So I think hopefully we'll get to that point where we can actually share the responsibilities and then get some things out their places, and they can actually exercise more and get out to do more things. But what about?
And I think we learned. I do think we learned a lot from the pandemic. I know that I found it quite painful when I was on my own for a bit, but it made me appreciate open spaces a lot more. It made me get out and go and have a walk. It made a lot of people realize exactly how much could be done from home and how it could be job shared. So maybe we've learned some good lessons from that we can take forward.
So. That's true. Because working from home now, honestly, you can actually get a lot done from the comfort of your home, to be honest. But we also have to be careful that we don't fall into that, because you can actually get lazy as well, and not go out for a walk and end up walking and just walk from home instead of just going out there to go for a walk. So you have to find that balance.
Absolutely. And I tell you something else that is perhaps quite a good thing to wrap up the conversation with, because you said you were on your last question. Yes, it's good to have that time to yourself to knuckle down and get things done without interruptions. But I think that we're all really mindful of how important social connectivity is, how important it is to have people in your life that you can engage with and share experiences and time with. And there is no doubt from research that's been done that the people who do best if they do get cancer are the people who have a support environment, have people around them, and to help them have the right attitude to fight the disease. We talk about fighting cancer, but it's very, very clear that those people who have the right mindset, because they've got that supportive environment of other people around them, they absolutely always do better. So we can't forget that social interaction is an absolutely intrinsic and important part of our life, and that's what makes us human beings, really, is that ability to interact and have that social interaction.
I agree. So that's so important, and because if you have more social connections, you go out more, to be honest. Absolutely. You have yourself going out more, and by going out more, you tend to exercise, get to know more people, at least walk around, at least instead of just staying indoors. I agree with that as well. But on that note, this is where we're gonna wrap up for today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for coming on to the show.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. And I hope the podcast met your expectations at the end of the day.
Well, it just felt like we were having one of our normal chats,
Exactly. So hopefully we should do more in the future.
I think so. We can have another chat.
All right. Have a lovely day.
You too. Thank you so much.
All right.